afternoon, and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. Founded in 1976 by 13 visionary women leaders, CMC's mission is to connect people and ideas through community conversation. From its beginning, CMC has welcomed everyone. I'm Ellen Bloch, the Director of Transfer Pricing and Tax Planning at Vertiv. I'm also a member of the CMC Board of Trustees. Today's live stream is presented by the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch. Let's thank all of those supporting today's forum. You might have heard that CodeLaunch is coming to Columbus next month. If you hadn't heard of CodeLaunch, think Shark Tank for software developers. CodeLaunch was started in Dallas in 2013 by software developer Jason Taylor. Jason sought a way to give life to new software ideas that might not otherwise see the light of day. CodeLaunch pairs up software developers and their big dreams with venture capitalists who can fund innovative projects. At stake for the winners, potentially millions in funding. We're so pleased to share the excitement around CodeLaunch's Columbus debut with today's panelists. Please welcome Falon Donohue, partner and investor of Narya, Dr. Navin Goyal, the co-founder and CEO of Loud Capital, and Steve Lekas, the co-founder and CEO of Branch Insurance, and our host today, Josh Harrison, president of Improving Ohio. You can learn more about today's speakers in your forum flyers. Josh, the podium is yours.
Ellen, thank you for that wonderful overview of CodeLaunch. I'm going to go into a little bit of historical context for CodeLaunch, and then we're going to turn it over to our panelists for kind of an insider's view on how founders and investors think about early stage startups. So I'm going to start with just the purpose. CodeLaunch's purpose is to connect founders with early stage startup investors, including VC. The way that we do that is we partner with local software development firms to build a demoable, demonstratable product, kind of take it from the PowerPoint to an actual workable product. And we do that at no cost to the founders, and we don't take any equity. And it's the only accelerator I know of that has those terms. There may be others out there, but thank you, yes. The organization was founded in 2013 in Dallas and provided an event there annually for that city. And in 2019, Improving invested in CodeLaunch to scale it to other cities in the US and beyond. We have plans for Mexico and Canada as well. And I'm proud to say that Columbus was the third city outside of Dallas to host CodeLaunch. And it's because of the entire ecosystem here, not just startups and founders, but the university, really the entire community. And I don't think that's a surprise to anyone in this room that there's something in the water here in Columbus. And so that brings us to today. CodeLaunch, it's going to be happening August 25th at the Rife Center. And for those in this room and on the live feed, there will be a QR code for a free VIP pass. My colleague Emily Toney will be sharing that on the live feed. And it's a showcase competition featuring the work that these local software development firms have been doing with the founders. We present it to an audience. We have VC panelists creating that Shark Tank-like experience, and then the audience chooses who they think, what they think the best idea is. And even in previous events, runner-ups have gotten founding from venture capitalists. So everyone has an opportunity to be invested in. The winner really just gets that marketing and bragging rights. So let's kind of turn it over to our panel and understand what it means to be an early stage startup and how investors and founders think about this. And let's just start with, what does that term mean, early stage startups? How's that different? To borrow a phrase from Peter Thiel, going 0 to 1 is an entirely different animal than what follows it. So what does that mean? Let's start kind of with the investors and then move on to founders. Falon, go ahead and go into that.
Those terms are pretty fluid these days as the market has shifted pretty dramatically over the last several years. And it also really depends on the type of company that you're building, whether that's a life sciences company or a hard tech company like an aerospace company. But a CodeLaunch company will certainly be considered early stage, maybe even more specifically pre-seed stage or seed stage. Venture capitalists tend to invest in different levels. So the earliest stages, a founder is focused on building out their team, determining if there's a market, finding their first customers, and then trying to unlock that next level of funding, typically the seed stage, then Series A, Series B, and so on and so forth. The goal of the venture capitalists, of course, is to de-risk their investment, so they set milestones for these companies to achieve before they receive their next level of funding. They also typically invest alongside other venture capital funds who are experts in the field and can help the company achieve scale. I might have gone too far, I don't know.
No, you explained it well. I would just add that it's messy. There's a lot of ideas in early businesses. Some people think it's a lifestyle business and they want to continue with that and grow it slowly. Some people don't know yet. Some people have an idea and they think it's a company and they say, I want this to be around the world. It's just messy. You have a lot of first-time founders, you have experienced founders, but that's actually why I'm attracted to it, because it's messy and creative, and you have to get to know people and their ideas and kind of dream alongside them. So I really enjoy that, but a lot of our industry, I would say investment industry and VC industry, are really focused, especially the very big dollars are focused on later stage, when companies start to have more of an identity, they have more of a vision on what they want to do, they have people and groups and founders and boards together that have kind of stood the test of time and ideas. And so it's just a whole spectrum of crazy, wild ideas, and then as we get to a company and identity, need more capital to scale. That's kind of the spectrum.
So when I hear the word messy, I hear subjective. Like you can't look at financials in the same way you can with a later stage company. So what sort of skill sets or what attributes are you looking for? Because in that stage, it's very subjective. So what matters?
That's a great question. So since it is, and when I say messy, let's call it lack of structure. And so if you're talking to a first-time founder who has an idea and has built something and has actually initially some customers, and now they want to take money from investors, they want to raise capital. One of the things that I look at and a lot of folks look at are the people, their commitment to it. What are they going to do when things get really, really tough if they haven't had a hard time yet? Because you can make a sale on a product and you feel like, wow, that wasn't so hard. But then to scale it and then to be relevant 5 years later, how committed are they? And maybe they have a personal story that they are selling this product for and they are so committed. What risk are they taking? So some people start with a lifestyle business and have a full-time job, do really well, and so if things get tough, are they gonna quit, right? So these are things that you kind of determine. There's no exact science to it, although there are some scientific tools, but it's getting to know the founder and the team and their personality traits that can assess, are they gonna be a team member for when things get tough? That's kind of what we come back to.
Gotcha. I heard narrative, grit, being a team player. Let's get inside a founder's head. It wasn't that long ago when you started Branch. What was going through your head? What did you think you had to get right?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. You know, I think if I told you what early stage means from a founder perspective, I think what you start with is someone who's just lightly insane. And you really want to be lightly insane because, you know, I think part of the investor problem is determining who's only lightly insane. But once you've decided that you can go do something where a fundamental question should be, well, why hasn't anyone done this before? Right? That you see something no one else sees. But that means that you walk into this with a big idea and a big dream that at this moment only you believe in. And so like the founder perspective, I think of early stage, and especially the earliest stage is, you know, to use Dr. Goyal and Falon's terms of identity and de-risking, there's a lot of risk. You probably have a complex life already, right? Whatever your liabilities might be. And you're probably not going to be making very much money in the near term. And so you have stresses. You also believe in your idea, but you have to convince the world. You have no identity. And no one cares about you. If you cease to exist, the world changes none at that moment, right? That's early stage. You're before this moment of de-risking by proving there is a market, right? We talk about this a lot in early stage companies of product market fit. You've designed a thing. Is there a market for that? Does anyone want to buy it? And so you move through this earliest stage of trying to convince other people. Being at least a little crazy is helpful here because you can believe it even in the face of massive, consistent rejection. Because whenever you're doing this, this is what you're going to find. And also, you can't do something fundamentally big by yourself, right? I mean, we think about this in teams specifically. I think the deity of the co-founder or the founder is also, lacks the acknowledgement that there is a village raising this child in 100% of circumstances. But that combination of risk and uncertainty, I think, really manifests at those earliest stages for the founder in just how you think about yourself. You've promised your family and friends who all believe in you, and there's just a lot of psychological dynamics that go from there in that early stage while you try to prove, yes, other people believe in this idea.
So one of the goals of CodeLaunch is to create geographic diversity, and by that I mean activity away from the coast. And really what I mean by that is activity outside of 2 or 3 cities. Each of you started your ventures in Columbus, or at least the Midwest generally. Why?
Well, I live here. My friends are here. But, I like Columbus for the same reason I like venture. I don't believe the past is necessarily prologue and the best is yet to come. And so while we believe at Narya that these IT-focused funds will continue to make money in California, we think that the real upside is in these more esoteric sectors solving very significant challenges for our country. And we have world-class research institutions in Ohio, here in Columbus. We have Ohio State, Battelle, Nationwide Children's Hospital. I mean, these are fantastic resources, and the science coming out of these institutions is just remarkable. So, even before Intel, we certainly believe that Columbus was an incredible place to launch and grow a venture capital fund. But now, currently in the Intel environment, what we think will be a post-Intel world, sounds like the CHIP Act's going to pass, so that's a good thing. We think that this community is just going to be one of the best places to launch a tech company in the world, and so we're excited to be here in the earliest days.
Yeah, so I have started a couple of companies here. The first one was a mobile anesthesia company called SmileMD in 2014, which now is about to enter our 5th state. And I say that, number one, because I'm proud, but number two, because I've been able to work in different ecosystems in different cities. So I was also living here, so it was easier to start where you live. But in seeing different communities, I think we have a lot of great ingredients here, but just like I was having a conversation a little earlier, we still have an opportunity to be very different. And so if you imagine there's different kitchens, which represent cities with different ingredients sitting there, a lot of people have the things that they need. And so we have cost of living, we have talent, corporations, money. Do we have intention, and are we able to lower our walls down? So even if you have an amazing hospital center, an amazing zoo, an amazing science museum, and amazing other corporations, are we able to lower our barriers to work together so we see a whole vertical of success? And so when a company comes in, like Steve's company, and is working here, is he able to connect with different corporations and banks and people so we could all build that together and make that a community win? Not just a win that takes a headline in the paper. And so I see a lot of other cities doing that and not realizing that. And I think Columbus is just small enough on the precipice of huge growth. But we have the opportunity to work closely together for economic development and to have these businesses stick around long term. So we have the young folks not only staying here when they're graduating from a school or a college, but when they come here and move here for a specific job, they have so many other things to be excited about. That's our opportunity, and this is actually the short version of my answer, by the way.
I'd just add, from our perspective, when we were building Branch, we weren't from here. My co-founder was from North Carolina. I'd grown up outside of Cleveland, Akron, and we knew one or both of us had to move. Also being quantitative operators, it was this wonderful moment to say, well, why would you put a business anywhere? And so it gave us the opportunity to lay out what would the bones of the city we built on top of enable us to do. And so we started with an analysis of every city that had more than 150,000 residents, 208 U.S. markets. And then we narrowed it according to the traits of what was important in our mission, the product, the problem we sought to solve. And things like local talent, attractiveness of recruiting, size of airport, and most importantly, in a business like Branch's, which is home and car insurance, which consumers perceive as a commodity, the cost structure of your business will create the cost that your consumer has to bear. And so when we brought these things together, we narrowed it down ultimately to 4 cities, and Columbus was the standout pick. We've been here now for 3 years. The company's 4 years old, and I think it was absolutely the right decision. Ohio is a wonderful place to build, pro-business, many different support structures and systems, but Columbus especially had some really strange elements. One was that the growth of the city is all in the post-industrial age. And so we have a modern infrastructure that far exceeds the population's needs. And so looking at, compared to other markets, traffic and other elements that make it difficult to access the whole talent population didn't exist here. Also, the happiness of the population, the optimism, because it's grown so fast for so long, wasn't like a lot of the cities that had once been big and had become smaller. And so the combination of, like anything, and I think to the comments on the panel, you really want to be intentional and have purpose behind the things that you do to try to stack the deck in your favor when you're building, because, back to my first comment, it doesn't matter if you succeed at your earliest moment. And so you want to give yourself every reason to succeed. And I think for that reason, for us in our business, Columbus was the perfect place to build something that our kids' will remember.
All right, Steve, I'm going to start with you on this next one. What's working well in the startup ecosystem, kind of the entire ecosystem, but more importantly, what are some of the challenges?
I think one of the things that's working well is we have a ready population of people that are interested in the startup community. And that's both the talent to populate a growing company and also the talent sets that would like to upskill or reskill into the things that especially tech-oriented startups will need. I think that's working particularly well, at least for us at Branch. I think things that aren't working yet as well is there's still a lot of pieces to connect around humans or ideas and capital and talent to make everything go together. I think part of why, and when we first started pitching for capital back in 2016, we had many venture capitalists at the time say, well, we love it, and if you'd be willing to move to New York, we'd be interested because we have an infrastructure here and we can support you as you need the support. And in markets like Columbus, the support's not as old, it's not as mature, it's not as well-worn a trail. And I think, as evidenced by Dr. Goyal and Falon's organizations, we're building that in Columbus, and the growth generally, the startup growth has been great. We still have a lot of maturing to do in that way.
Any additional thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think to what you said, Steve, is the optimism of the city, since we've been growing, and now recently just the momentum is crazy. I think the pandemic has also pushed folks from larger cities, and they're looking at places like Columbus. So I think that optimism is in the air, and we should smile and we should be excited. On the flip side, the opportunity and the work we need to do a better job of is start really appreciating what entrepreneurship and venture can do for economic development. When we look at, if we just look at venture capital, and I like to talk at my own industry on how we can be way better where we take all this money and all this experience and we put them into companies, and we know whether we get a return or we don't, it's on to the next one. Well, if we look at venture as an opportunity to really be a funding source of innovation and creativity, accepting that there will be things that fall flat on their face but continue to go and grow, what that does is it will attract more creatives and innovation. It will attract more companies, which is a goal of all of us to just continue building the ecosystem. And the young folks, I'll tell you, the young folks, what they think is really sexy, entrepreneurship and venture capital. And guess what? When you start connecting that to aspirational jobs and brands, which we can do here and will continue to do, you will not have trouble with people leaving or recruiting people. That will happen. So when you start thinking decades ahead of our time, that's how we can really take the opportunity of economic development, private-public partnerships, which Columbus does a nice job, but we can do bigger and better. And so we just need to take a little bit more risk and know that this is a longer-term play here. This is not just a short-term window.
I agree with everything that's been said. I'll just add that on every level, we need to continue to believe in ourselves and invest in ourselves, invest in our own communities, invest in our own funds, invest in our own entrepreneurs. And I'm excited that CodeLaunch is here because I think that that will, be an important player in the ecosystem. We need venture capital along the continuum, but at the earliest stages, long before we come into play, there's an energy and an enthusiasm and a culture that needs to exist. And I think Columbus could do a better job of building that at the earliest stages, and I think CodeLaunch will be an important piece of that.
So each of you mentioned talent in some form in each of your answers. So let's shift gears and focus kind of on the talent. We have a number of founders here in the audience and on the live stream that have submitted to CodeLaunch. What advice would you give any early stage entrepreneur? What do they need to know?
It's really hard. That's why the failure rate's so high. It's a very difficult job. There are a lot of things you need to be focused on, but I think the most important thing you can do at the earliest stages, or really any stage, is surround yourself with the best people, make sure that you're all aligned and incentivized, and then do not run out of money. That is the most important thing you can do.
I was going to say something similar, that, find product market fit, don't run out of capital, but Falon stole my second one. The only other thing is, there are founder communities, people you can talk to about, just how you're working through it all. And those people also, having been there, will likely want to be helpful and have lots to share. And so seek those people out. We've got a great community of them here in Columbus, some great startup companies. But Cleveland, Cincinnati, the startup markets there are also growing and vibrant. So I just suggest, recognize you're doing it all by yourself, and you probably learn a lot, but also take some heart from other people that have been through some of the same things you're going through.
And I would just add that I like to compare my old world and new world. My old world is being a clinical anesthesiologist for 13 years, and to be that, I had a direct roadmap. If I could get these grades, if I could get in, if I can continue to train, that was a very straightforward line. And then the entrepreneurial world, it's, maybe I like the word today, messy, but there's no roadmap. There's no really anyone to compare yourself to, which can be scary, but it's also empowering because you do not have to do it like anyone else does. And so people always have these assumptions of, okay, so to be a founder, I need to do this, I need to look like this, I need to get capital to grow. No, there's no rules. If you really care about what you want to do, whether it's sell lemonade or problem solve because it's personal to you, don't let anyone stop you. And it is not easy. It will take a lot more time, a lot more money. You will consistently tell yourself that you want to quit, and it's just supporting yourself with other positive people that keep you going. And that's why in my ventures I'm here, because I've had amazing people talk to me when I wanted to quit, not if, plenty of times. And if it doesn't happen to me every few months, I'm probably not pushing the envelope enough.
So I have this debate often with friends, and I'll leave my opinions out as the moderator, but what does it take to be an entrepreneur? Is it some innate superpower? Is this a trait that can be taught? And either way, how do we identify those people? Whether it's innate or taught, how do we identify them?
It's a great question. Actually, I think there's a pretty broad spectrum. I think, and actually going back to my comment about how mature the startup community is, when I was living in San Francisco, people were starting businesses that had no problem they were solving because they just wanted to be entrepreneurs. I actually think this is part of what Navin was saying as far as like you have to assess whether there is product market fit. And I think in a vibrant startup community, you have a lot of people that desire to be entrepreneurs as the career choice. But I think for people that didn't come from that particular background, which is much rarer, I think, in everywhere else in the world, there needs to be some compelling reason to found a company. And so for a lot of people, you came from a career, a depth in that space, and you see an opportunity where other people didn't see it. For a lot of people, they just had a problem. Like they were trying to do a thing and they're like, I understand how this could be better. And I'm savvy enough to think about how I might structure a business around it. And so I think the only common thread amongst all of us is we're willing to take that risk. However, we felt that, at some point it became compulsion. But there is probably a risk-taking thread, that light insanity that I affectionately mentioned that's probably common.
Yeah, and I think that was well said. I think there is a broad spectrum of personality, and sometimes you realize it at the age of 40 or 50, and sometimes earlier on. But the interesting thing is you don't have to start your own company to really get some benefits out of it. And that's what we tell a lot of investors who would want to invest in the space. And they're like, I'm good, but I like this a little bit, right? And I have, two girls, 11 and 13, who I, can't stop talking about entrepreneurship to them. And they're like, shut up, Dad. Like, stop talking about entrepreneurship. But it's really that exercise in creativity that you can take what we say, I dream of this, and turning that into something real. There's something special about that. And that exercise itself, to me, can be very entrepreneurial. And so if that turns into actual action and taking risk, you perhaps are an entrepreneur. But everyone dreams, we all know that, right? So it's just, I think it applies to everything. But again, that's what my girls say, shut up, Dad, so.
No, I think that's right. I'll just add, when I met Steve, I'm dead serious. I thought then, and I still think, he might know more about insurance than anyone who has ever lived. He loves insurance, he's passionate about insurance, and it shines through. He's been able to build an incredible team. We believe he's building an incredible company. And if you looked at our deal memo on Branch, Steve and his team were a huge part of that.
So I heard more in favor of learned in this panel discussion, but some combination of the two. This is a field that's very daunting to get into. How can we think about mentorship and bringing people into it?
If I could start with, I never considered entrepreneurship growing up. It wasn't something that I'd ever been presented with. Really didn't know any entrepreneurs, had no sense of how to capitalize a business from scratch. And so like a lot of people that I grew up with, the choices were kind of like on the spectrum of trades to engineering, and you can kind of choose your path along that spectrum. I actually think one of the most important things that we have to do for people that would consider or just to broaden the horizons is just open up more models to them. That it's not impossible, and actually to Dr. Goyal's last comment, that every time you turn around, it's another opportunity. Right, you're not stuck with or saddled with the thing that came before you. And also, I was at a very big insurance company for a long time, and I thought we were great. But I didn't do any of that, right? I inherited the ability to feel like we were great. And so, that's where I was taking my identity. And as an entrepreneur, once you understand the mechanics of it, and also it benefits our startup community for more of us to be savvy with the mechanics of it, right? Like trying to teach people who've never seen an options grant how to think about it or value it. Like these things are also things that make it more challenging, but also things that allow, once you're conversant in the language and the mechanics, it makes the opportunity identification much easier. And so if you have models and an understanding of, the kind of the basic mechanics and fundamentals, then I think those two ingredients are important, but not frequently a part of the Midwest, at least in my experience growing up here.
Yeah, and when it comes to like mentorship, which was your question, just to clarify, I think there's a lot of individual opportunities to do that outside of what we're talking about entrepreneurial wise. And so if you've ever, I speak to a lot of kids, including my daughter's classes, et cetera. So when you look and you see a sixth grader and you say, hey, can you mentor? If you were to ask that question, they'll look at you like, first of all, what is a mentor? Second of all, no, I don't know anything. And you say, hey, can you help this fourth grader do this? Oh yeah, blah, 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 right? And so that's how mentorship starts. So it's like at the individual level, do you have enough experience to pass on to anyone, let's call it less experienced? And when you phrase that question that way, then people start to actually act on it. And so, me being in my space, leaving medicine and going into the entrepreneurial world, I actually have a lot of physicians that reach out globally who are very curious about my pathway. And it's so interesting that you have adults who do very specialized medicine who don't think they have much to offer other people because they're so specialized and they're just used to it every day. And so if you have an adult who literally saves lives somewhere across the world that does not has really thought about that they can pass on value, then you look at great entrepreneurs like Steve here, who seems to be very self-aware, but there's plenty of other entrepreneurs who don't feel like they have anything to teach because they're so busy and, oh, what do I know? I've fallen 10 times. So I just think it's encouraging each other, like your left and your right, to say, why don't you just start sharing an experience with someone, and then you turn that into a more formal process. That's how I see a potential of a community or a room like this to be able to really pass on experiences to others.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I'll just add that, with the goal of getting more people excited about entrepreneurship, peer-to-peer mentorship is just as important. If you're attending hackathons and you enjoy them, start a hackathon. Get together with a group of friends and start creating these events around town. The friends that you make at this young age, if you are young or whatever age, may become your future co-founders.
All right, there are a contingent of economists that believe we are either heading for a recession or that we're already in one. If so, what effect will that have on company formation, good or bad?
Generally, I think that's good, but I'll take a step back and just explain something. Most venture capital funds are primarily funded by institutions. These institutional investors are university endowments, foundations, pension funds, et cetera. And these institutional investors have buckets of capital. Their total investable dollars, they have X percent that goes into this bucket and X percent that goes into that bucket, and the largest bucket is public equities. And recently, we saw public equities take a nosedive, and because of that, the piece of the pie allocated to private equity has swelled because these private companies are held on the books at their last valuation that they raised capital at. And so you're seeing a lot of these institutional investors become over-allocated in venture capital, and therefore they have significantly slowed making new investments. And when the LPs stop making investments in venture capital funds slow their investments into startup companies, and you see that kind of trickle through. With that said, there is still plenty of capital out there. This is a long-term game. The typical venture capital fund deploys capital from 3 to 5 years. So many of the good funds are still capitalized. All of the good funds will continue to raise money. All of the good founders will continue to raise money. Depends on who your customer is. But if you are developing a company that solves a significant challenge and you're an exceptional founder that's willing to take a risk, this is probably the best time to build a company. If you look at the last recession, 2008, 2009, some of the best companies in the country were built during that time. That's the Ubers and Airbnbs, et cetera. So while capital may be less available, Rich Lang had always said, ignorant and no money is the best combination for a founder. While there may be less capital available, talent will certainly be more readily available, which is your most important ingredient. So I think it's a great time to build.
All right, so Falon is pro-recession. What does everyone else think?
I mean, I agree. Builders keep building, investors keep investing. The world still goes, and so if you go to your original, if you're an entrepreneur and you really want to solve a problem, that problem doesn't change because of the market or a recession. That problem is still there, and actually, that's why I nerd out on really like purpose-driven companies. When someone is trying to bring access to care to children, that does not change. In fact, it might get worse in a recession. So your problem just became bigger. So the builders need to keep building. We need to support them, and investors need to keep investing because honestly, things are on sale right now, and who avoids sales? And the other thing is, it's kind of like we're in line at a water fountain, and suddenly Gatorade becomes sexy, and everyone leaves. Well, you're still in line. Guess what? The line just got shorter, and go get your water. That's it. So keep going.
As a founder and business operator, are you excited about the recession?
I'll answer the question I want to answer now. But I think agree with all the comments. Aside from the pro-recession comments, if you have already founded a company, then the reset could be hard. Because as things get remarked in how valuations are created for all the reasons that Falon mentioned, you can be in a position of facing down rounds. This is where your company is less valuable when you raise money at this stage than it was at the prior financing. And so there is a lot, people that are around us all, having founded businesses that are now important to our communities, maybe trying to figure out how to put their next financing together. And it can be a difficult period. I mean, where dramatic change in short periods is frequently difficult. But a lot of the people that that I stay in contact with, this is top of mind as we enter a harder capital period.
So all of you are very successful today on the panel, but if you were to start over and do something totally new within the entrepreneur space, what would you do? And to ask that another way, where do you think the future unicorns are, which is a company that will grow into $1 billion of valuation? Where are those today? Where do you think they'll be?
I'll chime in here, and I've already started.
I'm sorry, real quick.
Yeah, of course.
This is the last question I'm going to ask. We're reaching the top of the hour, which means it's time for audience questions. CMC has a long tradition of inviting audience questions. For those on the live stream, Doug Buchanan will be fielding those questions. And for those here in the audience, please join Doug at the microphone for questions. I'm going to ask this last question, and then we'll be ready for yours. And by the way, quick editorial, questions end in a question mark. Or just fake it and do like a little uptick at the end of your sentence, at a minimum.
That's good.
Sorry, Navin.
No, that's okay. I'm involved in some educational companies, and so I've really been digging deep, whether it's my own kids talking to other folks, and even folks in this room. We've all been affected by education. We all believe in it in our own way. And so when you look at modern education and you look at workforce development, again, all economic development stuff that I nerd out on, how can you get a kid who wants to do this and connect them directly to employment as they grow? And so you have a lot of teachers who love to teach but don't feel like they're teaching students anymore. They're working in a system who's not serving them necessarily. And that can be anywhere. So I think a huge opportunity is to bring all this knowledge and education that's been done, research, experience, everything, and connect it to a child earlier in an accessible manner for them to succeed. So I think an educational, and I'm not just talking about an online platform, which is a vehicle, but I'm talking how do you get a kid, or let's just, any of us as adults in here, to learn something and to act upon it. I think that is a huge opportunity.
Well, I'm a venture capitalist, so I can't focus on only one thing at a time, so I'll just cheat and say I think that There are a lot of industries that are still very ripe for disruption. We have a lot of very significant problems in our country around our broken healthcare system, supply chain issues, access to nutritional food. So I think there are a lot of opportunities out there for entrepreneurs to be successful.
I have very little to add. All of my answers will end in insurance, and so I'll just leave it at that.
All right, we are ready for questions.
Josh, thank you, and thank you to today's panelists. Great conversation. So question, can you tell us about the CodeLaunch competitors? Do they tend to have professional experiences in common? Do they come from unique backgrounds? Tell us about the folks who are actually competing in CodeLaunch.
Yeah,
If you can.
I'll answer this one. Because we don't charge anything to the founders and we don't take any equity, we find we get a very diverse base of founders. And diversity can be defined in a lot of different ways. I'll say it this way, when you talk to a very high-profile VC firm, the person that walks in that door and asks for money looks a very specific way, they went to a very specific school, and they tend to exist in very specific industries. I think one of the beauties of CodeLaunch is it breaks all that apart. I see my good friend John Hollins at the microphone.
I'm just here to heckle. Yeah, awesome panel. Thank you guys for your time. So kind of from the outside looking in, is there any fear of cannibalizing each other in the venture capital space, you know, from the fintechs, the insurtechs, you know, everyone fighting for, you know, that next unicorn? And then also with the market having peaks and valleys, how do you keep, you know, a startup or a new company from having those peaks where you see, you know, the new shiny thing on the market and then all of a sudden it disappears? So how do you avoid that?
Well, venture is a collaborative sport. We all work quite well with each other. When we were determining Narya's fund size, our first fund is 120 million. That was very intentional. Because we knew there was a specific role that we wanted to play in the continuum. We collaborate very frequently with seed stage funds that will invest up to a certain point, and we collaborate very well with growth stage funds that we invest alongside of. So there will never be a point where Narya wants to grow to a certain size that we become collaborative with our trading partners. More specifically in Columbus, we could use 40 more of us, and we still don't have enough dollars here. We still won't have enough capital here. The venture capital industry is growing globally. It's certainly growing here, but compared to other ecosystems, it's certainly not outpacing anything. While we can say anecdotally there are more venture dollars in the ecosystem, there are more companies building in Columbus, there are more women starting companies in Columbus. That's happening everywhere, and I really don't see us outpacing the trends. What was your second question? I'll let Navin answer that.
I'll
Yeah.
say the object.
Second one, John. I think my observation is you have to accept a fair valuation, a fair value for selling shares when you do a new financing. If you optimize for maximum valuation, then you leave a lot less wiggle room if the systemic factors change, right? The market shifts or whatever else. You know, to the earlier comments about building, great builders build great businesses. You can still put yourself in a position of taking huge peaks and valley swings because the value of the business was not easily pegged to the valuation of the business. And so I think you see this very much in IPOs, that if you're thinking of an IPO being the crest, right? Like we've made it, and you try to push that valuation up at IPO, you might expect it exhale with no market change. And so I think, like, from a founder's perspective, you want to ensure that you're taking a fair valuation for the company as you build. And if you get out ahead of your skis, you have a lot more odds of volatility.
I'll just add that I agree with what Falon said in the sense of there are a lot of opportunities to have more funds, not just here, but you know, we are present in Chicago and Raleigh, North Carolina. You would think a city like Chicago would also have plenty of funds and plenty of money. There's not enough. So most markets I've seen don't have enough funds. Collaboration is actually a dream. If we due diligence on a company, we decide to go, and we can call someone and say, do you want to get in on this? And we can fund them, again, driving the purpose of the founding company and the team. That would be great for everyone. On the second hand, when it comes to, the peaks and, all the roller coaster of some companies, that is going to happen, especially in the venture ecosystem. There are a lot of other dynamics to it. But what I always go down to is if the company is actually solving a problem, you'll get a lot more stakeholders that benefit from it, not just the investors. So if we're, again, going back to kids' health and access, if, that affects a lot of people that people really care about. So even if the venture world is involved in that and there's money to be made, there's still a lot of benefits to the community, and so you get more buy-in, and there's a better chance of sustainability and that company being present 10 years from now, which again, I think we should be thinking about.
Thank you. I'm Bill Wayhoff with Steptoe and Johnson. It's a law firm. But in an earlier period of my life, 26 years ago, I was a founder. And we put together a business plan, went to a bank, got a line of credit, lived off that for a couple of months, and then had it paid off in 6 months, that sort of thing. So the venture capital world, is that mostly debt? Is it mostly equity? Is it taking securities, or a combination of the above?
I would say majority is equity as a blanket statement, but then you actually also have other vehicles, venture debt. You can also get banks involved for more traditional debt. But high level, I would say venture is very equity driven, especially when these are new concepts and sometimes pre-revenue or even post-revenue. They don't fit traditional marks for banks. So, again, there's no rules, and so you can make your own pathway, but I would say as a general statement.
Yeah, you can create your own path. You just have to ensure legally that your investor is aware of it up front. Most traditional venture capital funds have a 20% rule where 20% of the fund can go into some sort of alternative investment, but also in most traditional venture capital funds, that's still in the form of equity. It just may mean that they may be able to take a secondary position, or this became very relevant during the cryptocurrency craze as well. But we work very closely with entities like Silicon Valley Bank that provide the debt piece. And if you're building something that's, a capital-intensive project where you maybe have construction costs or something like that, it may make more sense to take on debt, which would not be from us.
Mr. Wayhouse, I'd just add that I think it's important to understand enough about the different types of capital that you might raise and what your business plan looks like to determine which capital source is most appropriate to use. This, again, goes back to becoming conversant in these are elements of founding a business today. But you might consider private equity if you need a ton of money up front, but you won't retain a lot of ownership, right? You might think of venture capital if you are going after a very big market that creates a power law return possible upside. But you might think about pure debt if you could bootstrap aside from the debt, and otherwise you could bootstrap, and there's many other flavors aside from these. But I think it's a really important point, and not something we teach a lot of people. I certainly didn't know much of it growing up in the corporate world.
Hello. Thank you guys for being here today, first of all. So one question for you. So with COVID, obviously, especially with larger corporations, you've seen a lot of transitioning to hybrid work or remote work. I'm curious what your thoughts are, either in your own company or within your portfolio companies, when you're trying to build that kind of founding team. My assumption would be that there's a huge inherent advantage to co-locating and you're physically in the room building product together. What are your thoughts on that, whether that is something that makes sense, or does it make more sense to have everybody kind of all around the table?
I think my opinion is, and actually what I've been seeing with our portfolio companies, including our own, is I think remote is now more of a valid option than before. And so that's in the toolbox. And so certain companies are doing really well remotely, even starting companies remotely. I think that has to do with personality, leadership, culture, and intention of the company. But personally, I think early on especially, man, the energy around other people in person, there is so much more we get done in 5 minutes versus a 1 hour virtual call. That's my personal experience. So all I'm saying is I see how people can succeed in both ways, but I really think a healthy hybrid approach is the best of both worlds. Just depends on what your spectrum is.
Question for Falon. Falon, you mentioned in an online article that you were surprised at one point in your career at how few women were in venture capital. Is that still the case? And if so, what are the best ways to change that?
Yes, that is still the case. Allraise and other entities do a good job of reporting these statistics. It has certainly improved over time. I'm a pretty active member of Allraise, and I have found that to be an invaluable resource. My forum met last night, and using each other to open up doors and sort of have our own club has been really incredible. Venture, for better or worse, is a relationship. It's based on relationships, and a lot of that is who you know, and it's much, much, much more difficult for women to get in the door. It is much more difficult for women to develop these deep relationships that go beyond mentorship, but the person who's talking about you when you're not in the room, that's advocating for you on your behalf at all times. I think that's just more difficult for women because frankly, there are just few of us. And if I knew the answer, I would do it, but I don't know. I know there are a lot of people who are very smart that are working to make change, and progress is happening, but probably not as quickly as we all would like.
I'll just add, when I came to Loud full time, when I left my practice, I posted a picture and I kind of made my big announcement. There was a few people who were like, man, there's a lot of dudes in that picture. And I was like, I know. I mean, I'm very aware. And what can we do? And so I had to think about this really publicly. And what I can say on the action that I've done and a lot of other people are starting to do is when it comes to investing in women founders and including and educating more women investors. And so if I had to pick up the phone right now, again, as a guy just sitting here, I would have a lot of guys that I would call. Hey, I'm going to do this educational event for alternative investments. We have some deals, et cetera. And so we've made it a conscious effort to include more women. So it's bringing that awareness. Number two, we're actually doing quarterly women educational events on alternative investments. So people who don't even younger folks, people in high school came and they just like, I just want to learn about investing. And so that's an educational aspect. And then the one thing I want to say is how powerful venture capital is when you start investing in women founders, and I would just say underserved communities in general, they become role models for other folks. And then hopefully they exit as a founder and they start their own fund. So that's another way we can do within our own venture ecosystem.
Thank you all. I think we're running out of time, but very quickly, what is your favorite or most inspiring entrepreneurial story? And Steve, I think we know what yours is, but please go ahead.
It's a great question. I'm trying to think of one other than my own. I don't have another answer prepared for that, but maybe I'll pass the mic down and I'll come back if I can think of one.
I'll mention Matt Scanlon. I think his success in this community has been the exact kind of success story that we talked about 10 years ago and then finally started to see. Not only did he hire incredible people and play a significant role in building the startup culture community in Columbus, but when Cover My Meds exited, you saw a large number of angels enter the community, and I know for my own fund in particular, we would not have gotten it off the ground if it weren't for several of the employees from Cover My Meds investing in funds, investing in startup companies, and there is a Cover My Meds mafia that exists now today. There are a handful of companies here in town that are founded by previous Cover My Meds employees, and now, of course, we're seeing the incredible company that he's building with And Health with a lot of the alumni from Cover My Meds. So it's the type of success story that you dream of for a city like Columbus, and Matt made it happen.
That's a really hard question, by the way. But one of the one of my favorite stories is from Angelo from Hyperion Motors, one of our early investments. He came up to us. He's quasi kind of crazy and insane, and but in 2015 came up to us. His hair's fighting gravity, and basically says, "I can build a car that goes 1,000 miles on hydrogen energy." And we're like, after we laughed for a couple of minutes, we were kind of rude. We're like, "Okay, let's listen to you." We ended up doing our diligence, talking to a bunch of hydrogen energy folks who were way smarter than us, and they validated it. And so I became one of the first angel investors. Again, I was a little crazy then too. And we ended up becoming friends, and he was out in Orange County. He's from Warren, Ohio, and ended up building Hyperion Motors. And he goes, "One day we're going to build a big factory. I'd love to come back to Ohio." And recently, with Jobs Ohio, they just announced that they're going to be building this hydrogen energy company, which his car goes 1,016 miles. He called me 3 years ago and said, "We did it." That's a really personal story, of course, but think about that. That's an Ohio entrepreneur, went to the West Coast, got funded. I think we'll continue to do really well, and we have an opportunity to have our own Tesla-esque kind of energy company here. So.
I'll just add, the story I most frequently tell is not our story, but at the very beginning of insurance in the United States, there was a company, still exists, called the Philadelphia Contribution Ship for Protection of Homes by Fire. They weren't marketers, they were insurance people. And they had, this was one of the very first. I think it was technically the second insurance company in the U.S. At some point, the fire fighting capability happened at the same time in Philadelphia. Ben Franklin was involved in both. And what the firefighting unit figured out is that they couldn't effectively access homes that had a lot of trees around them. And so the Philly decided, well, we're just going to stop insuring all homes with trees. And so that created a market need, a problem to solve. And some of the employees quit and started a new company called the Mutual Assurance Company for Protection of Homes by Fire. And all they did was they created a different price for people with trees in their yard versus people without. The first pricing segmentation or risk segmentation in insurance. And so that was the first ineligibility, created the first pricing segmentation, so like innovation out of necessity, which then became known as the Green Tree Mutual. It's what branch is named for. But I love this idea of like necessity. Before the word innovation, I think invention was the more common term, and that's where you begin when you have this problem, and then you do something impactful. So that's my story.
Fantastic, love it. As we close out, I'm going to invite Ellen Bloch to do the honors.
So I hope you found today's forum very interesting. I know I'm very inspired at the role entrepreneurship plays in the future of Ohio. Today we'd like to thank our online virtual seat patrons and to the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation for presenting our live stream in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch. And our special appreciation to today's speakers, Falon, Navin, Steve, and Josh. Please make plans to join us next Wednesday for extremist threats from left and right in the second forum in our Democracy in Crisis monthly series. Thank you all for joining us. We could not do this without you. We look forward to seeing you next Wednesday at the Columbus Metropolitan Club presents another community conversation. Thank you.